A black man named Donnell is wrongfully arrested by two racist police officers, Jenkins and his colleague, but when Donnell's true identity is revealed, the entire police station is left speechless. What happened, and who really is Donnell that made the whole police station suddenly realize that they were facing not just a legal case, but a monumental reckoning? Let's find out, but before we get into the story, comment below where you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Jasper, Georgia. The sun had just set, and the streets were empty except for a lone man walking along the road. His name was Donnell, a tall black man with a kind face and a gentle heart. He had just finished helping an elderly neighbor with her groceries and was heading back home. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights appeared behind him, and the sound of sirens filled the air. Donnell's heart raced. He hadn't done anything wrong, but seeing the police pull up behind him filled him with fear. Two officers stepped out of the car, their faces cold and hard. "Hey, you! Stop right there," one of the officers shouted. Donnell froze, confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his voice calm but shaky. The second officer, Officer Jenkins, frowned as he approached. "Where are you coming from?" he asked, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "I was just helping my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson," Donnell explained. "She lives a few blocks away." But the officers didn't seem to care. They exchanged a look, and before Donnell knew it, they were handcuffing him. "Wait! What did I do?" Donnell protested, his heart pounding. "You're under arrest for suspicious activity," Officer Jenkins said, his tone cold. Donnell's mind raced. Suspicious activity? What did that even mean? He hadn't done anything wrong, but here he was, being treated like a criminal. As they pushed him into the back of the police car, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. Something wasn't right. Donnell was taken to the local police station. The ride felt like an eternity, and his thoughts swirled in confusion. Why was this happening? What had he done to deserve this? He had always been kind to everyone in town, always tried to stay out of trouble. They put him in a small, cold cell. The metal bars clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing in his ears. His heart sank even further. How was he going to explain this to his family? His mother, who always worried about him, would be devastated. Hours passed, but no one came to explain why he was there. The room was dim, and the only sound was the ticking of a distant clock. Donnell sat on the hard bench, staring at the ground. He could hear the other prisoners talking, some of them laughing, others angry. But he didn't belong here. He wasn't like them. As time passed, the fear in Donnell's chest grew. He had never been in trouble with the law before. Why was this happening now? And more importantly, how long would he be here? The next morning, Officer Jenkins came to get Donnell from his cell. He was taken to a small, grey room with a single light hanging from the ceiling. Officer Jenkins sat across from him, a stern look on his face. "Who are you really, Donnell?" Jenkins asked, leaning forward. Donnell frowned, confused by the question. "I told you, I'm just a guy from Jasper. I live here, I help my neighbors. I've done nothing wrong." Jenkins didn't seem convinced. "We've run your name through our system, but something doesn't add up. Why can't we find any records on you? No driver's license, no past addresses, nothing. Who are you hiding from?" Donnell's heart skipped a beat. How could that be possible? He'd lived in Jasper his whole life. He had a job, a home, and a family. "I don't know what you're talking about," Donnell replied, shaking his head. "I'm just a regular guy. There's nothing to hide." Jenkins stared at him for a long moment before sighing. "We'll figure this out. But until then, you're staying right where you are." As Officer Jenkins left the room, Donnell felt a strange chill run down his spine. Something about this whole situation didn't make sense. But deep down, Donnell knew there was more to his story, more than even he realized. Hours passed, and Donnell couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. Why couldn't the police find any information on him? He'd always been careful, lived a simple life, and never gotten into trouble. His mind drifted back to his childhood. His mother used to tell him stories about his father, a man Donnell had never met. She always said his father was important, but she never gave any details. Could this be connected to that? Could his father have left some kind of legacy that Donnell didn't know about? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. What if his father's past was the reason he was sitting in this cold cell? What if there was something about his family that he had never been told? As the hours ticked by, Donnell couldn't help but feel that the answers were just out of reach, waiting to be discovered. But he knew one thing for sure: his life was about to change forever. Donnell sat quietly in his cell, lost in thought. The grey walls seemed to close in on him as time crawled by. Suddenly, the sound of the heavy door opening broke the silence. He looked up to see a man in a suit walking toward him, his face unreadable. The man introduced himself as Mr. Davis, a lawyer. "I've been assigned to your case," he said in a calm voice, sitting down across from Donnell. "We need to talk." Donnell was confused. "But I didn't ask for a lawyer." Mr. Davis gave him a serious look. "Someone asked for me. A very powerful someone." Donnell's stomach twisted with nerves. "What do you mean?" Mr. Davis leaned forward. "You've been accused of a crime you didn't commit. But there's something you need to know. The reason you're here isn't just about some random arrest. It's about your past." "My past?" Donnell's voice trembled. "I don't understand." "Donnell, do you know who your father was?" Donnell froze. His father? That was a name he hadn't heard in years. His mother rarely spoke about him, and when she did, it was always vague. "No," he admitted quietly. "I never knew him. My mom said he was important, but that's all I know." Mr. Davis nodded. "Your father was more than important. He was a man with connections. Powerful connections. He tried to keep you safe by staying out of your life, but it seems his past has caught up with you." Donnell's mind reeled. He had always wondered about his father, but he never expected something like this. "What do you mean? What kind of connections?" "I can't say much for now, but I'll tell you this," Mr. Davis said, his voice lowering. "Your father was involved in things that could change the way people see you. And that's why the police can't find any records on you. It was all hidden, to protect you." Donnell's heart raced. His father had protected him from what? And why? He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a mystery he wasn't ready to face. Mr. Davis stood up. "I'll do my best to get you out of here, but be careful. There are people who don't want you to know the truth about your father. Stay strong, Donnell. The truth will come out soon." As the lawyer left, Donnell sat back on the cold bench, his head spinning. What had his father done? And how could it affect his life now? He had so many questions, but no answers. And the one person who could help him, the father he had never known, was gone. The next day, Donnell was called into another interrogation room. This time, the officers were different. There were 3 of them, their expression serious and unreadable. Officer Jenkins was nowhere to be seen. "Donnell Johnson," one of the officers said, his voice low and steady. "We need you to tell us everything you know about your father." Donnell swallowed hard. His mouth went dry as he sat across from them. "I don't know anything about him," he replied. "He left before I was born." The officer exchanged a glance with his colleagues. "That's not what we've heard," he said. "Your father was a man of interest to us for a long time. He was involved in some very dangerous business, and we think you know more than you're letting on." Donnell's heart pounded in his chest. He felt trapped, like he was being accused of something he didn't even understand. "I swear, I don't know anything," he protested, his voice shaking. "I didn't even know him." The officers stared at him for a long moment before one of them stood up, tossing a folder onto the table in front of Donnell. "These are documents we've uncovered about your father," the officer said. "Take a look." Donnell hesitated before opening the folder. Inside were photos, articles, and records about a man named Isaac Johnson, his father. The pictures showed a man in suits, attending high-level meetings, standing beside people who looked like they held great power. Donnell's stomach twisted as he flipped through the pages. What was he involved in? Donnell whispered, his voice barely audible. The officer leaned in. Your father was a powerful man, with ties to secret organizations and movements that go beyond what you could imagine. And now, it seems those same forces are looking at you. Donnell's head swirled with confusion and fear. Why hadn't his mother told him any of this? What had his father really been involved in? And what did it have to do with his arrest? Later that night, back in his cell, Donnell lay awake, his mind racing. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had learned. His father had been a man of power and secrets, someone who had hidden his identity to protect Donnell. But from what? And why were the police after him now? As he lay there, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. A guard appeared at his cell, unlocking the door. You have a phone call, the guard said. Donnell frowned, surprised. Who would be calling him in the middle of the night? He followed the guard to the small room with a single phone. The guard handed him the receiver, and Donnell hesitated before pressing it to his ear. Hello, he said cautiously. A voice came through the other end, calm and steady. Donnell, it's time for you to know the truth. Donnell's heart skipped a beat. Who is this? He asked, his voice shaky. The voice paused before answering. I was a friend of your father's. He trusted me with secrets, ones that have been buried for years. But now, those secrets are coming to light. You need to be careful, Donnell. People are watching you. Dangerous people. Donnell's blood ran cold. What do they want from me? The voice softened. They want to know what your father left behind. And they'll stop at nothing to get it. Before Donnell could respond, the line went dead. The phone clicked in his hand, leaving him in stunned silence. He stood there for a moment, his mind spinning. Who was that? And what did they mean by what his father left behind? One thing was clear, Donnell was in deeper than he ever imagined, and his father's shadow still loomed large over his life. Donnell returned to his cell after the mysterious phone call, his mind reeling from the weight of what he had just learned. He had been dragged into a world of secrets, where his father's past was haunting him in ways he could never have imagined. The silence of the cold, dimly lit room only intensified the unease building inside him. As he lay on the small cot, Donnell's thoughts drifted back to his childhood. He remembered his mother, always protective, always cautious when talking about his father. It all made sense now. She wasn't just being vague, she was hiding something to keep him safe. But safe from what? One memory stood out. He was about 5 years old, playing outside in the yard. He had found an old, worn photograph of a man tucked inside a book. His mother had taken it from him, her face pale, and told him to never ask about that man. Donnell hadn't understood then, but now he knew his mother had been trying to shield him from the truth about his father. But why hadn't she told him? What could have been so dangerous about his father's life that it needed to be hidden? As these thoughts swirled in his mind, sleep finally overtook him, pulling him into a restless dream filled with faces he didn't recognize, voices calling his name, and a man standing in the shadows, watching him. The next morning, Donnell was awoken by the sound of keys rattling outside his cell. Officer Jenkins stood there, his face tense. Johnson, you've got a visitor, Jenkins said, unlocking the door. Donnell's heart raced. Who would want to visit him now? Was it his mother? Or maybe the mysterious man from the phone call? He followed Jenkins down the narrow hallway to a small room with a glass divider where visitors could speak to prisoners. Sitting on the other side of the glass was an older woman, her face wrinkled with worry. It was his mother. Mama, Donnell whispered as he sat down, lifting the phone to his ear. Oh, Donnell, she said, her voice trembling. What have they done to you? Donnell's heart ached at the sight of her. She looked more tired than he had ever seen her before. I don't know, Mama. They arrested me for no reason. They say it's about Dad. His mother's face tightened at the mention of his father. She glanced around, as if checking to make sure no one was listening, before leaning in closer to the glass. I was afraid this would happen, she said softly. Your father, he was mixed up in things, dangerous things. I tried to keep you out of it, but I guess it was only a matter of time before it caught up with you. Donnell frowned. What things, Mama? What was he involved in? His mother hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. He was part of a powerful group, Donnell. They operated in secret, pulling strings behind the scenes. He never told me much, but I knew enough to know it was dangerous. He tried to leave that life behind when you were born, but some things, they never let you go. Donnell's stomach churned. His father had been involved in some kind of secret group. What did that mean for him? What do they want from me? He asked, his voice low. His mother shook her head. I don't know, baby. But you have to be careful. These people, they don't care about who gets hurt. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their secrets. Donnell's mind raced with questions, but before he could ask more, an officer signaled that the visit was over. I'll do everything I can to help you, his mother said quickly, standing up. Just hang on, Donnell. The truth will come out. As she walked away, Donnell sat there in stunned silence. The puzzle pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than he could have imagined. Back in his cell, Donnell's thoughts raced. His father had been part of a powerful group, one that was dangerous enough to destroy anyone who crossed them. But why were they after him now? What could he possibly have that they wanted? Just as he was piecing things together, Officer Jenkins appeared at his cell again. This time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Mr. Davis, the lawyer. Johnson, Jenkins said with a grunt, unlocking the door. Your lawyer wants to talk to you. Donnell followed them to the same small room where he had met with Mr. Davis before. The lawyer sat across from him, his expression serious. I have some news, Donnell, Mr. Davis said. But you're not going to like it. Donnell's heart sank. What is it? The people who framed you, they're more powerful than I thought. They've planted evidence against you. It's not looking good. The case could drag on for months, maybe years. Donnell's hands clenched into fists. I didn't do anything wrong. Why would they frame me? Mr. Davis leaned forward, lowering his voice. Because of who your father was. They want to make sure you don't dig too deep. They're trying to bury the truth before it comes out. Donnell felt a surge of frustration and fear. How was he supposed to fight against something like this? He was just one man. Mr. Davis glanced around, then leaned in even closer. There's one way out of this, he said in a whisper. But it's risky. Donnell's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I know someone, Mr. Davis said. Someone who can help you disappear. You'll have to leave everything behind, your name, your home, your family. But it's the only way to stay safe. Donnell's mind raced. Could he really just leave everything behind? Could he walk away from his life to escape the people hunting him? I don't know if I can do that, Donnell said, his voice shaking. Mr. Davis nodded slowly. I understand. But think about it. They're not going to stop coming after you. They'll use every tool they have to destroy you. Donnell's heart pounded in his chest. The choice before him was impossible. Stay and fight, risking his life and the lives of those he loved, or run and leave everything behind. Neither option felt right, but he knew he had to make a decision. The weight of his father's past was pressing down on him, and the road ahead was darker than ever.